previously, we introduced ourselves to the modified version of spending multiplier, which is applicable to an open economy. That means we include the effect of international trade. In other words, we include the effect of a change in income on imports. So 1 over MPS plus MPI, or 1 over 1 minus MPC plus MPI. So let's work on an exercise. Suppose the MPC is 0.75 and MPI is 0.15. What will be the effect on the aggregate demand if the investment declines by $100 million? So let's take a few minutes. Why don't we pause for a few minutes to solve for this? I hope you've spent some time to solve the problems. So now let's look at the solution. So the setup is essentially the same as what we have done before. So there's a change in aggregate demand equal to the initial change in either one of the components of aggregate expenditure multiplied by the spending multiplier. So the initial change in components of aggregate expenditure, in this case, that's the decline in investment, so negative $100 million, multiplied by 1 over, so we're given the MPC, so we can use 1 over 1 minus MPC. So 1 over 1 minus MPC, it is also equal to marginal propensity to save, 0.25. So what we have here is 1 over MPS plus MPI. And so that gives us a spending multiplier of 2.5. So what we have here is with an initial change in investment by $100 million, the aggregate demand decreases by $250 million. You can see that the effect is smaller with an open economy than a closed economy. So once the economy is open up, what's going on in the domestic economy is shared by foreign economies. So if the United States is doing very well, for example, it can buy more goods and services from other countries. So other countries can also do well. Okay? So by the same token, if the United States is not doing so well, okay, obviously it cannot afford to buy as much from other countries, so other countries are affected negatively too. So that's the implications of an open economy or globalizations. Countries become increasingly more interdependent on each other. So once we open up the economy, once we have included the MPI, we can see that the effect on aggregate demand is smaller because the spending multiplier is smaller. Let's just try to illustrate the effect graphically. So on the left-hand side, we illustrate the initial change in either one of the components of aggregate expenditure by using the aggregate expenditure function. So what you have here is an initial decline in investment. So the aggregate the aggregate expenditure functions curve shifts downward. The vertical distance is $100 million. That's the initial decline in investment. On the right-hand side, let's illustrate the end result after the multiplier effect has taken place. So initially, we have the aggregate demand 1, AD1. So after the multiplier effect has taken place, the total effect on the aggregate demand, the total decline in the aggregate demand is $250 million. So the horizontal distance between these two aggregate demand curve is $250 million. By the way, some of you may be wondering why I have AD sub n here instead of AD2. That's because in previous semesters, some of you are very mathematically inclined, because here I have AE1 and AE2, and that's just the first round of decline. That's the initial decline in investment. And on the right-hand side, I'm supposed to illustrate the total effect after the multiplier effect has taken place. So remember the story we tell about Google. This is what happens after rounds and rounds and rounds and rounds and induced decline in consumption. So virtually infinite number of times. Okay? So some of you who are mathematically inclined are not happy when I put AD2, because you would think that these two should correspond to each other, which is only the first round of change. So that's why I put AD sub n. Okay, so this is after infinite number of times of induced decline in consumption. But if you want to put AD2, that's fine. Okay, I understand what you're trying to say. So let's try one more example. Okay, this time let's try to find how a change in marginal propensity to consume can affect the size of the multiplier effect. So in this case, marginal propensity to consume has increased from 0.75 to 0.8. Other information stays the same. MPI, for example, stays at 0.15. So let's find what happens to the magnitude of the multiplier effect. Why don't we pause for a few minutes? So you may want to pause your video a little bit so that you can work on this problem. So let's take a look at it. Let's try to find the size of the spending multiplier. So it's 1 over 1 minus MPC. So we're given MPC, so we can use 1 over 1 minus MPC plus MPI. So 1 minus MPC is simply equal to 0.2. And it happens to be equal to marginal propensity to save. Okay? So 1 over MPS plus MPI alternatively. So what we have here is the spending multiplier is equal to 2.86. So this is larger than what we had just now. So with an increase in marginal propensity to consume, we now have a larger multiplier effect. So let's recall the story of Google. Okay. So the whole reason we have multiplier effect is because household members, when they experience a loss of income, they cut down on the consumption. So if we have a larger marginal propensity to consume, what that means is consumer households are more responsive to any change in income. So if there is an increase in income, consumer households are going to increase their consumption by a larger amount every round. If there is a decrease in income, then consumer households are going to cut down on their consumption more in every round. So at the end, the multiplier effect is larger with a larger marginal propensity to consume. So let's conclude. Let's just have a brief summary of what we have observed so far. The larger the marginal propensity to consume, the larger the multiplier effect. So we know that marginal propensity to save is simply the reciprocal of marginal propensity to consume. So let's recall 1 minus MPC equal to MPS. What that means is the smaller the marginal propensity to save, the larger the multiplier effect. So the smaller the marginal propensity to import, the larger the multiplier effect. So that's what we have observed so far.